March 15, 44 BC, Julius Caesar walked into a meeting of the Roman Senate. He was at the height of his power. He had conquered Gaul. He had won a civil war. He ruled Rome as dictator. But as he took his seat, a group of senators surrounded him. They had daggers hidden under their togas. One senator grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down. This was the signal. The senators attacked. They stabbed Caesar 23 times. He tried to fight back at first, but there were too many attackers. When Caesar saw that Marcus Brutus, a man he had trusted, was among the assassins, he stopped fighting. He pulled his toga over his face and died at the foot of a statue of Pompey, his old rival. The conspirators thought they were saving the Roman Republic. They thought that by killing Caesar, they would restore freedom and the old ways. They were wrong. Caesar's assassination didn't save the Republic. It guaranteed its destruction. More blood would flow. More civil wars would tear Rome apart. But to understand how Rome got to this point, we need to go back. Back to when the Republic started to break. By the early 1st century BC, Rome ruled the Mediterranean world. But the Republic was in trouble. The problem was inequality. Massive inequality. A small number of senators and wealthy families owned enormous estates. They used slaves captured in Rome's wars to work these estates. Land was cheap. Labor was free. They made huge profits. Meanwhile, small farmers, the backbone of the old republic, were disappearing. Many had fought in Rome's wars for years. When they came home, their farms had failed. They couldn't compete with large estates using slave labor. These farmers sold their land and moved to Rome. But there wasn't much work in this city. Rome filled with poor, unemployed citizens. This created two classes. A tiny group of extremely wealthy people, and a large mass of poor citizens who needed food and entertainment to keep them from rioting. Some Roman leaders saw this as a crisis. They tried to fix it. In 133 BC, a tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed a land reform law. Take some land from the wealthy and give it to poor citizens. This would recreate a class of small farmers. The wealthy senators were outraged. They refused to accept this law. When Tiberius pushed ahead anyway, a mob of senators and their supporters attacked him. They beat Tiberius to death with clubs and threw his body in the Tiber River. This was shocking. Political violence had always existed in Rome, but not like this. Roman citizens killing Roman citizens over politics in the city itself. 10 years later, Tiberius's brother Gaius Gracchus tried to continue the reforms. He also was killed, along with thousands of his supporters. The message was clear. The wealthy elite would use violence to protect their interests. The rules of the Republic only applied when they were convenient. This started a cycle. Reformers would try to help the poor. The wealthy would resist. Violence would erupt. And increasingly, the violence involved armies. The Roman army was changing. Before, soldiers were citizens who owned property. They served for a season and went home. Now, wars were longer and farther away. The property requirement was dropped. Poor men joined the army. These poor soldiers had nothing to return to after their service. They depended on their generals to give them land and money when the war ended. This made soldiers loyal to their generals, not to Rome. Generals who had loyal armies became more powerful than the Senate. The first general to really show this was Marius. Marius was a successful general who had defeated enemies in North Africa and saved Rome from Germanic invasions. He was elected consul 7 times, which was illegal under Roman law. But he had an army, so who could stop him? Marius was supported by the populares, the political faction that claimed to support common people. His rival was Sulla, another successful general. Sulla was supported by the Optimates, the conservative faction that supported the Senate and the wealthy. In 88 BC, these two generals fought for control of a command against a foreign king. When the Senate gave the command to Sulla, Marius used political tricks to take it away. Sulla responded by doing something unprecedented. He marched his army on Rome itself. A Roman general, leading Roman soldiers, attacked Rome. This had never happened before. Sulla captured the city. Marius fled. Sulla made himself consul, reversed the laws he didn't like, and then left to fight the foreign war. But when Sulla was gone, Marius came back with his own army. He captured Rome and killed his political enemies. It was a bloodbath. Then Marius died of natural causes. When Sulla returned victorious from his war, he captured Rome again. Sulla made himself dictator. Not the old kind of dictator, a temporary emergency leader. A permanent dictator with absolute power. Then Sulla did something that shocked Rome. He created proscription lists. These were lists of political enemies. Anyone on the list could be killed legally. Their property would be confiscated. Thousands of people died. Senators, knights, anyone Sulla didn't like or who had opposed him. People were murdered in the streets. Their heads were displayed in the Forum. This was Rome's first real civil war. And it showed that the Republic was breaking down. Sulla eventually retired, and the Republic continued. But everything had changed. Now everyone knew that a general with a loyal army could take Rome by force. Into this unstable world stepped three ambitious men. The first was Pompey. Pompey was called Pompey the Great. He was an extraordinary general. He had won victories everywhere. In Spain. In the Mediterranean against pirates. In the East against various kingdoms. He was Rome's most successful living general. The second was Crassus. Crassus was the richest man in Rome. He had made his fortune in real estate and slave trading. He used his wealth to buy political influence. The third was a young aristocrat from an old but impoverished family. He was charming, ambitious, and politically gifted. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. In 60 BC, these three men made a secret deal. They would pool their resources and help each other. Pompey had military glory and veterans who were loyal to him. Crassus had money. Caesar had political skill and ambition. Together, they could control Rome. This arrangement is called the First Triumvirate. Triumvirate means rule by three men. It wasn't official. There was no law creating it. It was just a private agreement. But these three men were so powerful that they effectively controlled the Republic. Caesar became consul in 59 BC. He used his position to pass laws that benefited all three members of the triumvirate. He ignored other senators who objected. He even used violence to push through his agenda. After his year as consul, Caesar needed military command. He needed an army and a chance for military glory to match Pompey's achievements. He got command of Gaul. This was the region north of Italy, what is now France and Belgium. It was only partially under Roman control. Most of it was inhabited by Celtic tribes that Romans considered barbarians. Caesar spent the next 9 years conquering Gaul. Let me tell you about Caesar's campaigns in Gaul because they made him famous, wealthy, and powerful. When Caesar arrived in Gaul in 58 BC, he had 4 legions, about 20,000 soldiers. He also had ambition and talent. Caesar was an unusual general. He took risks. He moved quickly. He personally shared hardships with his soldiers. He remembered their names. He gave them bonuses and rewards. His soldiers loved him. He was also a brilliant propagandist. He wrote detailed accounts of his campaigns and sent them back to Rome. These accounts, called commentaries on the Gallic War, made Caesar look like a hero defending civilization from barbarians. In reality, Caesar was the aggressor. He found excuses to attack Gallic tribes. He played tribes against each other. He invaded territories that had done nothing to threaten Rome. But his writing made it seem like he was protecting Rome and bringing civilization to savages. The campaigns were brutal. In one incident, Caesar besieged a town called Alesia. Gallic forces inside the town were surrounded. Gallic reinforcements came to help break the siege. So Caesar's men built walls facing both directions. One wall to keep people in. Another wall to keep people out. They fought enemies on both sides and won. It was a brilliant tactical achievement. After 9 years, Caesar had conquered all of Gaul. The cost was staggering. Modern estimates suggest that 1 million Gauls died in these wars. Another million were enslaved. Entire tribes were wiped out. Towns were destroyed. The culture of Gaul was shattered. But Caesar became incredibly wealthy from the loot and slave sales. And he now had battle-hardened legions that were fanatically loyal to him. Back in Rome, the triumvirate was falling apart. In 53 BC, Crassus tried to win military glory for himself. He invaded Parthia, Rome's eastern rival. But at the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthians destroyed Crassus's army. Crassus was killed. Now there were only 2 members of the triumvirate left, Pompey and Caesar. For a while, they maintained the alliance. Pompey had even married Caesar's daughter Julia, which created a family bond. But Julia died in childbirth in 54 BC. The personal connection was broken. And Pompey was jealous of Caesar's success. Caesar was winning glory in Gaul. He was becoming more popular. His army was loyal to him. Pompey began to side with the Senate. The senators preferred Pompey because he was more traditional, more respectful of their authority. Caesar seemed dangerous. In 50 BC, the Senate, encouraged by Caesar's political enemies, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome. Just Caesar, not his soldiers. Caesar knew what this meant. If he returned without his army, his enemies would prosecute him for illegal actions during his consulship. They might even execute him. But if he kept his army and refused the Senate's order, he would be declared an enemy of the state. Caesar faced an impossible choice. On one side of the Rubicon River was Gaul, where Caesar was legally allowed to have his army. On the other side was Italy, where bringing an army was treason. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar stood at the Rubicon with 1 legion. According to accounts, he hesitated. He knew that crossing would mean civil war. It would mean Romans killing Romans. It might mean the end of the Republic. But staying would mean his own destruction. Caesar said, "The die is cast." In Latin, alia iacta est. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army. It was an act of treason. But there was no going back now. Civil war had begun. Caesar moved fast. He marched south through Italy. Most cities opened their gates without a fight. Many of Pompey's soldiers deserted to join Caesar. Pompey and most of the Senate fled to Greece. They would gather their forces there and fight from a position of strength. Caesar couldn't immediately follow. Pompey controlled the navy. Instead, Caesar first went to Spain and defeated Pompey's forces there. Then Caesar returned to Rome. He made himself consul even though it was illegal. He arranged for money and supplies. Then he crossed to Greece with his army. In 48 BC, Caesar's army met Pompey's army at Pharsalus in Greece. Pompey had a much larger army. He had twice as many infantry as Caesar, and 7 times as many cavalry. He also had the support of the Senate, and the legitimate claim to be defending the Republic. But Caesar had better soldiers. Veterans from Gaul who had fought for him for years. They trusted him completely. The battle was hard fought. At one point, it looked like Pompey's cavalry would surround Caesar's forces. But Caesar had prepared for this. He had positioned his best troops to counter the cavalry charge. When Pompey's cavalry was driven off, Caesar's troops attacked Pompey's exposed flank. The battle turned into a rout. Pompey's army was destroyed. 24,000 of his soldiers surrendered. Pompey himself fled the battlefield. He escaped to Egypt, hoping the Egyptian pharaoh would give him refuge. But the Egyptians wanted to please the winner. When Pompey arrived, they murdered him and cut off his head. They presented Pompey's head to Caesar as a gift. Caesar, according to accounts, wept. Pompey had been his friend and ally before becoming his enemy. Caesar had hoped to pardon him. Caesar stayed in Egypt and got involved in a civil war there. He supported Cleopatra, the young queen, against her brother. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers. She would later give birth to a son that many believed was Caesar's. Over the next few years, Caesar defeated remaining opposition. He fought in North Africa. He fought in Spain. He fought enemies everywhere. By 45 BC, all opposition was crushed. Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world. Now Caesar had to decide what to do with his power. He had options. He could restore the Republic and step down, like the old Roman heroes. He could rule temporarily as dictator and then retire, like Sulla had done. Or he could keep power. Caesar chose to keep power. He made himself dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. This was unprecedented. Dictators were supposed to be temporary emergency leaders. Caesar was making it permanent. He kept the forms of the Republic. There were still consuls, still a Senate, still elections. But they were all theater. Caesar held real power. Caesar did implement reforms. Good reforms in many cases. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar which, with minor modifications, we still use today. He settled his veterans on land, taking care of the soldiers who had fought for him. He extended Roman citizenship to more people in the provinces. He started public works projects to employ the urban poor. He reduced the number of people receiving free grain to prevent dependency. He planned campaigns to expand the empire further. But Caesar also did things that worried traditionalists. He put his own image on coins. No living Roman had ever done this. It was something kings did. He allowed people to call him imperator, a military title, as a permanent name. He accepted honors that seemed almost divine. A temple was decreed in his honor. A priest was appointed to worship him. He wore a purple toga and a laurel wreath, symbols of kingship. And most troubling of all, there were rumors that Caesar wanted to be crowned king officially. To traditional Romans, this was unbearable. They had overthrown their last king 500 years earlier. They had sworn that Rome would never have a king again. The word king was an insult in Rome. But Caesar seemed to be becoming a king in all but name. A group of senators decided to act. They called themselves the Liberators. They believed they were saving the Republic from tyranny. The conspiracy was led by two men, Gaius Cassius and Marcus Brutus. Brutus was especially significant. Caesar had shown him favor and trust. Some even whispered that Brutus might be Caesar's illegitimate son, though this was probably not true. Caesar's trust in Brutus made the betrayal more painful. About 60 senators joined the conspiracy. They planned to kill Caesar at a Senate meeting on March 15th, the Ides of March. According to legend, a fortune teller warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. Caesar ignored the warning. On the morning of March 15th, Caesar's wife Calpurnia begged him not to go to the Senate. She had dreamed of his death. Caesar almost stayed home, but one of the conspirators convinced him to attend. When Caesar arrived, the conspirators surrounded him under the pretense of presenting a petition. Suddenly, one grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down. The signal. The senators drew their daggers and attacked. Caesar tried to fight back with his stylus, a writing instrument, but he was overwhelmed. 23 stab wounds. When he saw Brutus among the attackers, Caesar reportedly said, "Et tu, Brute. Even you, Brutus." He pulled his toga over his head and died at the foot of Pompey's statue. The irony was not lost on observers. Caesar died beneath the statue of the man he had defeated. The conspirators had succeeded. Caesar was dead. But what happened next? The conspirators expected that with Caesar dead, the Republic would be restored. The people would celebrate their liberation from tyranny. It didn't happen. When news spread, Rome didn't celebrate. The common people were shocked and angry. Caesar had been popular with ordinary Romans. He had given them land, money, entertainments. He had been their champion against the aristocratic Senate. The conspirators had no plan for what came next. They had killed Caesar, but had no strategy to fill the power vacuum. Meanwhile, Caesar's allies moved quickly. Mark Antony was Caesar's loyal lieutenant. He seized Caesar's papers and money. He called a Senate meeting. He agreed not to prosecute the assassins in exchange for the Senate confirming all of Caesar's acts and appointments. This was clever. It meant all the veterans Caesar had settled on land would keep their land. All the people he had promoted would keep their positions. Caesar's reforms would stand. Then Antony read Caesar's will to the people. Caesar had left money to every citizen of Rome. He had left his gardens to be used as public parks. And he had adopted his 18-year-old grandnephew as his son and heir. The young man's name was Gaius Octavius. After the adoption, he became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. We know him as Octavian. The people of Rome were moved. They rioted. They built a massive funeral pyre for Caesar in the Forum. They attacked the houses of the conspirators. The assassins had to flee the city. Their dream of restoring the Republic died with Caesar. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long way. Caesar's death triggered more civil wars. Wars that would last another 13 years. Wars that would finally kill the Roman Republic. The main players were three. Mark Antony was Caesar's loyal general and right-hand man. He was a good soldier and popular with the troops. But he was also impulsive and liked luxury and pleasure. Lepidus was another of Caesar's generals. He was competent but not brilliant. He would end up being sidelined. And then there was Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. He was only 18 years old. He was physically weak and often sick. He had no military experience. Nobody took him seriously at first. That was a mistake. Octavian had something important. He had Caesar's name. And Caesar's veterans loved Caesar. When Octavian, now calling himself Caesar, asked for their support, many came. At first, Antony and Octavian were rivals. They nearly fought each other. But they realized they had common enemies. The assassins, Brutus and Cassius, had fled to the eastern provinces. They were raising armies to fight for control of Rome. So Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus formed an alliance. The second triumvirate. Unlike the first triumvirate, this one was made official by law. These three men were given authority to rule Rome together for 5 years. Their first act was brutal. They created proscription lists, like Sulla had done. Lists of political enemies, who could be killed legally, and their property taken. Hundreds of senators and thousands of wealthy Romans died. Their only crime was being on the wrong side politically, or having wealth that the triumvirate wanted. One of the victims was Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, and a senator who had opposed Antony. He was hunted down and killed. His head and hands were cut off and displayed in the Forum, the place where he had given so many speeches. The triumvirate then marched east to confront the assassins. In 42 BC, at Philippi in Greece, the armies met. It was another civil war battle. Romans killing Romans. Brutus and Cassius were defeated. Both committed suicide rather than be captured. The liberators were dead. The men who killed Caesar were gone. But their goal of restoring the Republic died with them. Now the triumvirate had to divide the Roman world among themselves. Lepidus got Africa, the least important region. He would soon be pushed out entirely. Antony got the rich eastern provinces: Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt. Octavian got the west: Italy, Spain, Gaul. It seemed less attractive, but it included Rome itself. For several years, there was an uneasy peace, but everyone knew it couldn't last. Antony and Octavian would eventually fight for sole control. Antony made a strategic mistake. He went to Egypt and allied with Cleopatra. This made political sense. Egypt was wealthy and Cleopatra was its queen. An alliance with Egypt gave Antony resources. But Antony and Cleopatra also became lovers. This was a scandal in Rome. Antony was married to Octavian's sister, but he seemed to have abandoned her for a foreign queen. Octavian used this brilliantly in his propaganda. He painted Antony as a traitor to Rome, bewitched by an Eastern queen, planning to move Rome's capital to Egypt. Antony was no longer Roman, he was Egyptian. None of this was really true, but it worked. Roman opinion turned against Antony. In 31 BC, Octavian declared war. Not on Antony, which would be another civil war, but on Cleopatra. He was defending Rome from a foreign threat. The fleets met at Actium, off the coast of Greece. It was a naval battle. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was larger, but Octavian's fleet was better trained. When the battle started going badly, Cleopatra's ships suddenly broke away and fled. Antony, seeing Cleopatra's flagship leaving, abandoned the battle to follow her. The rest of Antony's fleet surrendered. It was a disaster. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt. Octavian followed with his army. In 30 BC, as Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead. In despair, he stabbed himself. He died in Cleopatra's arms, learning too late that she was still alive. Cleopatra tried to negotiate with Octavian, but he refused her terms. Rather than be paraded in Octavian's triumph as a captive, Cleopatra committed suicide. According to legend, she let a poisonous snake bite her. Octavian had Cleopatra's son by Caesarion, murdered. He couldn't have a potential rival with a claim to Caesar's legacy. Egypt became a Roman province. Its wealth now flowed to Rome. And Octavian, at age 33, stood alone. There were no rivals left. No other powerful generals. No other claimants. Octavian controlled the entire Roman world. The question was, what would he do with that power? Let's think about what happened in this episode. The Roman Republic died slowly, over decades. It died because of inequality, because of corruption, because generals with armies became more powerful than the state. It died in the violence of the Gracchi. It died when Marius and Sulla marched on Rome. It died in the conspiracy of the First Triumvirate. Julius Caesar didn't kill the Republic. The Republic was already dying when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. But Caesar did something important. He showed that one man could rule Rome. That a talented, ambitious individual with a loyal army could take control of the entire state. Caesar's mistake was that he didn't hide it well enough. He accepted honors that looked like kingship. He made it too obvious that he held all real power. And so the traditionalists killed him. But killing Caesar didn't save the Republic. It just created more chaos. More civil wars. More Roman blood spilled by Romans. 14 years after Caesar crossed the Rubicon, Octavian stood victorious. He had defeated all rivals. He held the same absolute power that Caesar had held. But Octavian was smarter than Caesar. He had learned from Caesar's mistakes. He wouldn't call himself dictator or king. He would be more subtle. He would keep the appearance of the Republic while holding all real power. He would transform Rome from a republic into an empire. But he would do it so carefully that many Romans wouldn't even notice. Octavian would become Rome's first emperor. And he would rule for over 40 years, bringing peace and prosperity. But that is a story for next time. Julius Caesar and Civil Wars.